Before I start this video, I would first like to say excuse me for the rather rough and rugged backdrop for this video. I'm currently out of town. But yeah, last night, what we just witnessed was the coming out party. And when I say coming out party, I don't mean Crawford hasn't proven himself to this point. I mean the coming out party of a man who just established himself as one of the greats, not only of this era, but probably to ever live in boxing. And that was Terrence Crawford last night against Spence. I predicted Crawford would score a stoppage late in this fight, and I did not think the fight would be as one-sided as it was. This fight was an absolute demolition job, decimation, a massacre. It was a humiliating effort by Crawford, which effectively just sent Spence flying across the ring, made him look ordinary, make him look like a guy who just picked up a pair of boxing gloves. I was genuinely in shock at what I had seen. I did not anticipate it one bit in the fashion that it was. Crawford completely outclassed Spence in virtually every single conceivable category you could find. And in the areas that Crawford tried to neglect, that Spence tried to capitalize on, Crawford shut down from early in the fight. Spence came out trying to jab with Crawford, looking to push him back and gain control of the center of the ring. Crawford's much snappier, quicker jab and reflexes allowed for him to win that battle. But the first round, Spence was able to do some good work to the body, was able to outwork Crawford. Crawford was looking to feel him out. Second round, a little bit more the same, but Crawford was a little bit sharper, starting to land some good shots over the top, counter-punching Spence's jab. And Spence was, falling in with his punches a little bit. Spence does tend to do that when he has his opponents against the ropes. He does tend to lean very far over his front foot in an attempt to get close and get inside on his opponents. Crawford noticed that, and he caught him with a 2-1, which sent Spence to the canvas. And that was when the fight turned from a competitive boxing affair to an absolute decimation job. Spence was reacting poorly to much of Crawford's work, and even in instances where he wasn't noticeably hurt, when he would get caught by Crawford, he would immediately take 2-4 steps back. He was intimidated by his explosiveness and by his speed. He was left without an answer. Crawford would just continue, and despite any of the good work that Spence was able to mount during the fight, where he would go to the body, Crawford's speed allowed for him to just immediately counter over the top. Spence was leaving his jab hanging low. Crawford noticeably had the longer reach in this fight. He was able to beat him to the punch, not only with his speed, but he was able to land on Spence at every single range. Spence is a guy who, and at the end of the day, when you watch top-level fights, when you watch guys operate against elite-class opposition, you're typically going to see them revert back to the, original style, or what they are naturally gravitated towards fighting in. The style they are naturally gravitated towards fighting in. Spence has shown that he can box from the outside against a certain caliber of opposition, against guys who have slow feet, say like a Danny Garcia, or even a Mikey Garcia, who was too small, who really didn't have the foot speed. Wasn't really super quick on his feet in the lower weight classes, but especially didn't have the foot speed at 147 pounds to be able to keep up with Spence. He's able to keep those guys, at range from the outside with a basic jab, a basic crouch, where they basically just can't get past their reach, or get past his reach. But it didn't work against Crawford. And he reverted back to his usual style, which is much more rugged, crude, trying to get low, get on the inside of his opponents, and just trying to effectively wear them down to the body. Crawford has mastered the ability to nullify and neutralize pressure fighting. Not only with his clinch game, but he's capable as an inside fighter. He's very good defensively on the inside. And he has the foot speed and the hand speed to be able to stick and move. He can virtually do every single counteracting effort against a pressure fighter that you can effectively imagine. He did all of those things against Spence, and then once Spence started to try to close the distance against him, he allowed Spence to get inside. He would quickly step away. He'd frame Spence's guard, step back. Spence would try to step in with jabs, and Crawford would just immediately come up with right jabs, long left hands. Didn't really even work the body that much, because his power was able to intimidate Spence. I know a lot of people saying that Spence a lot of people said that Errol was, weight drained, or that the car crash potentially affected his punch resistance. And while I do think there might be some truth to that, Spence hasn't fought too many explosive knockout artists. He hasn't fought many great athletes. Sean Porter was one of them, but he lacked the punching power. Danny Garcia had the punching power, but he lacked the athleticism, and he lacked the foot speed and the footwork to be able to get in position to land those punches the way Crawford was. Not only that, but he doesn't really have the longest of arms, and he hasn't been really a top world-class fighter since he was at 140 pounds. So Spence was able to keep him at bay, and he found it more easy to see Danny's punches coming, and in order for him to get hit by one of those no-look left hooks, he would have had to just lunge into range, when really all he had to do was win that fight was stay at distance. But let me keep going. If we look at Spence's opposition, to the beginning of his career, Kell Brook was able to, stun him a few times. Emmanuel Lartey was able to hurt him. Even Sean Porter was able to get his attention and buzz him momentarily. What Spence has is not an iron chin. What he has is great conditioning. So as long as he's able to keep a poker face and ride out the storm, he recovers very, very quickly. But he's never, in my view, had an iron chin. He's never been somebody who gets unaffected by big shots. And Crawford is easily the biggest punching and by far the most athletic fighter Spence has fought. So this was a level of power, whether he had gone through the accident or been affected by the accident or not. This would have been a level of power that he would have never been able to see in his life. At the end of the day, he's also 33 years old, and he's been fighting at welterweight for about 11 years, since he debuted in 2012. So Crawford, he was drained at the weight, yes, but it's not like he wasn't drained at the weight in his previous fights. His conditioning still looked good here. He was just getting beat up, and he was getting outclassed in a performance by a fighter who simply couldn't be denied, and put up one of the best performances I've ever seen in a boxing match in my entire life. The same thing actually happened earlier this week in Inoue-Fulton. Those two, Crawford and Inoue, have set themselves apart from the rest of the sport. They have been more dominant over their opposition than anybody else really has been in the sport. You might not necessarily say they fought the toughest opponents or fought the toughest matchups out of anybody, but they've fought a lot of world-class opponents. They fought guys who've been considered to be pound-for-pound level fighters. And what they've done to them is they've dismantled them. So, Crawford, I really don't even have much else to say. I'm kind of speechless, actually, at this point. Unbelievable performance. And I hope he moves up to 154 pounds. I hope he fights Charlo. I honestly kind of hope Jermell just pulls out of the Canelo fight, because fuck it, and he just fights Tim Tszyu. I hope he just takes that fight, beats Tim Tszyu, and just... I hope he and Crawford fight. Honestly, that's the fight I want to see. I want to see Crawford test himself even further against Charlo, because none of these guys on 147 pounds, save maybe Ennis with a puncher's chance, can deal with what Crawford brings to the table. He's too versatile, and people were deceived by the Brook fight or the Kavalauskas fight. Crawford was given a pretty big contract by Top Rank that Top Rank didn't really get a return for investment for, because they assumed he would be able to get the Pacquiao fight and his stardom would ascend. Pacquiao left Top Rank, and then after he left Top Rank, Crawford effectively was in a moment of stasis. There weren't really many top welterweights on his side, so he was forced to fight middling or past it opposition for several years. So it was really hard for him, in my view, to get up for and be as cerebral and as sharp as he usually is when he's in there with top-level competition. So it flattered his opponents, and I think a lot of people felt as though, Crawford was not as good really as he really is because of those performances. And well, now that he's finally gotten up for the fight, he's really shown you what type of level he's actually at, which is better than Spence. Spence is a very good fighter, but he ain't historically great. He ain't special. He's a world-class fighter. He's one of the greatest welterweights of his era, but he's not a transcendent fighter. And that's what I said before the fight on Twitter. I said this fight is going to be a display of world-class versus special. Spence ain't special. Spence, there's a lot of Spences in boxing. A lot of guys who can pick up belts, become 3-belt unified champions. A lot of guys who can even be #1 in their division. But Crawford is a special fighter. He's an Estrada, he's a Chocolatito, he's an Inoue, he's an Usyk. Hell, if you want to go to the past, he's a Chavez. He's a Ray Leonard. He's of that ilk in his era. He is in that upper crust, upper class in his era. Errol Spence is not really of that level, right? Errol Spence is more of a Fulton type. He's more of a Alexander Volstik type. That's kind of his level. Very, very good fighters. Fighters capable of ruling divisions, but you put a special fighter in there with them, they're going to revert back to what they usually do. Spence doesn't make significant adjustments in fights. What he knows how to do is he knows how to amp it up, and he has the intensity and the conditioning to beat guys down and beat them into submission even when he's outskilled. So say like he did against Kell Brook. But once again, these guys, that's Kell Brook. It's Lamont Peterson he's fighting. It's Sean Porter he's fighting, who Crawford had an easier time dealing with, who his foot speed and his physical attributes were able to get him past and make it much easier for him to control the fight. Crawford goes in there with Spence, and he showed you exactly what the difference in levels was, which was enormous. So that's going to be it for this video. Have a good one, man.